Welcome to Chapter 6, Part 1 of the Jatco CVT jf010e transmission. In this chapter you will learn the teardown process of the unit. My name is Jared Warren. I will be your host for this course. It's a great day to fix transmission, so let's get started. Specialty tools. A lot of times people don't want to tackle the CVTs because sometimes you need some special tools, and that is true. But for the most part, only a few are needed. The one main tool that's needed is a puller to get the pulley system apart. I personally like using the Pulley TJ1 puller. It's actually made for standard transmissions for removing the input bearing. But one thing I like about this puller is you can lock it onto the pulleys and remove the belt safely, and also pull apart the pulley safely without the jaws of the puller popping off the pulley. You can find the Pulley pullers, usually Transtar and WIT both have them, or you can go online, eBay, Amazon, those kind of things, and find them there also. There are some other choices to get the pullers apart and removing the tension off the chain. Transco makes a few puller adapters to use with your T-bar setup, which work quite nice. Adaptacase also has their setup. And CVTpushbelts.com, they have a toolkit. It's what's shown up here in the top right hand corner. So these bands go around the pulleys themselves, and here's the puller to remove the tension on the chain and pull the pulleys apart. Also, these pieces here in the middle are to help press the reverse brake spring retainer together, which would be nice to have. Necessarily don't have to have it, but this is a pretty nice complete toolkit for this transmission. The one bad thing about the kits is if you have to buy one basically for each different transmission. They're all a little bit different, so you're buying a few different kits. With the Pulley puller, you buy one and it basically works on every transmission. The only one that I'm not sure that it works on, or I know that it doesn't work on, is Subaru Generation 2 CVT. It does not work on that one, but the rest of them that I've worked on, this puller does work. Large sockets you may need that you don't already have: 32 millimeter, 46 millimeter, a 50 millimeter, and a 55 millimeter. I'd recommend the 50 millimeter to be in a deep socket. That's for the secondary pulley nut. Alright, so let's go ahead and start disassembling this transmission. A couple different versions on the pan. You have the aluminum one is shown here. You also have a steel version. It's a steel pan like a regular pan. So go ahead and remove the drain plug and drain all the oil out of it. Go ahead and pull the pan bolts. There's 20 46 millimeter long pan bolts for the aluminum pan style. You have a metal type gasket underneath the aluminum pan. Go ahead and pull the pan off, clean the magnets off. Then the next thing we'll do here, a couple different ways about this. You can either remove this lock clip on the right hand side here with the pick, and then pull the whole this yellow or whitish color connector out of the case connector is one way of doing that. Or there's also a C-clip on the outside of the case on top. You can go ahead and pull that out and pull this black connector and the wire loom all together. Either way, both work just fine. Go ahead and squeeze the green connector on the pressure switch. Then the next thing we need to do is remove the linkage. This linkage arm right here, and you take that off. So go ahead and break the 14 millimeter nut loose. You'll probably want to put a 19 millimeter wrench on the 19 millimeter nut on the bottom, just to make sure you don't bend anything. So break those two loose, remove both nuts, remove the linkage arm, Underneath the linkage arm you have the sleeve. Go ahead and grab a magnet and pull the sleeve out with it also. To remove the valve body, you're going to remove all the bolts labeled here. The bolts that are labeled with an A, there should be 4 of them at 30 millimeters long. So you have 1 up here by the ROM, and then you have 3 more towards the back of the case here. Then you have 2 53 millimeter long bolts. Both of them are up towards the front of the PAM. And then the rest of the bolts, 5 69 millimeter long bolts, go into the filter here and up through the valve body into the case. Just a note, valve body to case bolts are 90 inch-pounds. We'll talk about that a little bit later on reassembly. Underneath the valve body, you have 2 of these round seals, as case seals that seal off reverse and lube oil. So 2 rubber seals. I'm going to go ahead and grab a 24 millimeter socket and pull this pressure switch out. Talked about it earlier. This is the round C-clip that slides right into this case here. You can remove this connector now, or if you moved it with the wiring harness, either or is fine. Once we have this valve body off, I like to air check a few different things personally. I like to go to your forward clutch, which is right here. So air test your forward clutch right here, and then the center of the case where the black seal is. Air test your reverse clutch. Make sure those 2 clutches are nice and airtight. The other thing you can do, watch out when there's a lot of fluid in these pulleys, it will spit a lot of fluid out. You have your secondary pulley down here towards the bottom, and you have your primary pulley right here in the middle. The pulleys won't move a lot when air checking normally, unless they're rotating. The pulleys have to be rotating to allow the belt to move positions. It just isn't popping up and down. So just keep that in mind. And again, you air test one of these pulleys, and if that belt does move, it's going to spit out a lot of oil on the other one. So kind of really watch out. I don't necessarily recommend air testing the pulleys until after they're pulled apart. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and roll the transmission over now. We get the valve body off, and we're going to go ahead and roll the transmission over onto the top of the bell housing here. Go ahead and remove all the 14 millimeter bolts that hold the front case half together. And then there's a couple different pry locations right here, up here in the front. You can pry nicely with some crow feet pry bars. And then on the other side, a couple spots right here that you can, over by the diff, that you can separate the case with fairly easy and no damage to the case. Alright, so we got the case separated now. This is the front bell housing. So in the front bell housing, we have only 1 dowel pin on the 2 case halves. You'll want to pull out this lube tube, 10 millimeter bolt here. Here's everything, the lube tube and bolt and bracket all pulled out. Go ahead and pull that out. Little brass tube just pull straight out. Go ahead and clean that out and make sure it's clean and free of debris. Up here at the top, you have a couple more 10 millimeter bolts, about 15 millimeters long or so. Pull those bolts and the retainer out, and you can check the bearing. Make sure the bearing's in good shape. Make sure this bearing is tight in the case too, that it doesn't wobble back and forth side to side or anything like that. I put down here the bearing numbers that were in this case. There may be some different models with different bearings, of course, but just for reference point, I put the numbers in here. And then your transfer gear race, go ahead and pull that out. If it's in good shape, nothing needs to be done here. Make sure this bearing is nice and tight in the case. And then on your differential bearing, go ahead and pull that out also and make sure it's tight in the case. Note there are no shims under the bearings on the front case half here. All the shims themselves are in the main case for these for the preload and everything. So set the front case half aside, and now we're going to work on the main case. One thing to keep note of, there's a roll pin right here that likes to fall out, and you'll find it on the bench, or maybe you find it later in your parts basket or something like that. Not sure where it goes. It goes right where this linkage bracket is and keeps the linkage from going in and out. So roll around, a round roll pin right here in this area is where it goes. Go ahead and pull the pin, the park pawl, and the return spring out of the case here, and remove the lockup O-ring on the input shaft. Then we'll go ahead and remove your transfer gear. Check your bearings on the transfer gear. Check the gears itself for pitting, unusual wear marks, those kind of things. Go ahead and pull your differential straight out also. And here is your differential numbers and the shims. The shim for this differential is 23 thousandths. Of course, some are going to be thicker or thinner. You need to check preload on reassembling this, and we'll do that a little bit later in chapter 2. Transfer race. Here's part number or the race number. The shim on this one was 60 thousandths. Of course, some may be different. Then we'll go ahead and remove the pump and start disassembling the transmission. So we're going to remove the pump bolts. 12 millimeter headed bolts, about 40 millimeters long. So remove all these pump bolts. There's going to be a metal gasket underneath the pump. Set that aside. And there will be a thrust washer that rides on the drum. One thing that we noted, that the in-play on this input shaft was roughly 20 thousandths, which necessarily isn't a great way to check it, because the input shaft is just snap ring into the forward drum itself. So we'll go over in-play checks later in a different chapter also. So now we have the pump out over here in the top left. This is the thrust washer. Go ahead and pull the thrust washer off. Pull your input drum out. Then you want to go ahead and remove your forward hub and sun gear. On the forward hub, you want to check the splines on the inside here. And you want to check the pitting and wear marks on the outside sun gear area, of course. And here's the thrust washer. So the thrust washer has a bunch of holes on it in the back side of it. When you pull the input drum up, and this is here, you're looking at your forward hub, these holes are going to be facing you. So the holes face up in this hub assembly right here. After pulling the hub out, the small holes on this thrust washer are facing down, so you're going to see the sunny side of this thrust bearing. Here's the one planet you have. Inspect your planet gears, the side play on the planets, and where the reverse clutches ride. Make sure they're not grooved into the planet housing also. After you remove the planet, you're going to have another thrust washer. The side with all the holes faces down, so the shiny side or the smooth side is going to be facing up. One note about these thrust washers, they're all the same size. There's three thrust washers that are the same, and then there's one that goes in between the pump and that input drum that is larger. So pretty easy on thrust bearings. Haven't seen many issues with them. Let's go ahead and pull the reverse brake clutches out. So here's snap ring up here. Go ahead and pop the reverse brake snap ring out. Snap ring is 93 thousandths up top. Then you have a pressure plate with 4 clutches and 4 steels. Then we have a disc plate and snap ring 69 thousandths. Then we have your return spring cage and then a bonded reverse brake piston. Make sure you change this reverse brake pistons on all of them. Shouldn't be hard to find, and I know Seal Aftermarket Products makes the hyper blue ones, and I'm sure there are other aftermarket ones available also. Alright, so we got the front side of the main case stripped out. Now let's get these pulleys out of here and the rear cover out. So go ahead and remove all the 14mm bolts around the outside of this rear cover here. Do not remove the 12mm headed bolts that retain the pulleys. So these ones with the red X here in the center, do not remove those at this time. Go ahead and pry this rear cover off and get it loose. I usually flip this thing around with the rear cover laying on the bench after breaking the seal on the case, and I lift this main case half off the pulleys itself, because the pulleys are probably, I'm going to guess 65 pounds or so, in that range. It's kind of awkward pulling the pulleys out of the case, so I just lift the case off the pulleys. What you're going to find under the case here, you got a hollow shaft here, the pulley follower, and then you have a spring with end caps. So this cupped spring cap, it rides against the aluminum, and this stays with the spring. Then this other end here is basically like a bushing. I'm going to call it a hat bushing or T style bushing. It goes up inside, the sleeve goes inside of the spring. We'll show this, some better pictures of this on reassembling also. There's one O-ring here in the rear case. Make sure it, put that aside. And you have an oiler up here in the case. Make sure that gets cleaned out too. Alright, so now we have our pulleys laying on the bench and our case is removed. This time I always like to take a picture of which direction this belt is going. So find where the arrow is on the belt and make sure you take a picture. On this one, your primary pulley is on the right, secondary pulley is on your left, and the belt is going from right, the arrow is going right to left. As you see here, it's going to our left. At this time also, you want to take a couple zip ties and tie around the belt. I usually like to tie it right here, and I tie one more on the other side. We don't want this belt coming apart. So now we're going to go ahead and separate the pulleys and the belt system off the rear cover. So go ahead and remove the 12mm headed pulley bolts. Take those off. Take note, these bolts have a little O-ring on them, so we'll want to seal them up with the new O-ring, and probably put a little RTV or sealant on them also too. Notice these have the zip ties on here. That's to keep the belt together, like I said in the last slide. We take these are the jaws of the TJ1 puller. You put the puller over the secondary pulley, and then we start to pull up on this sheave here in that direction. As you see, there's some slack here, and we're started to pull the pulley out of the rear cover. So pull up on the rear cover at the same time, start tilting inward towards this pulley, and you see in the top right here, You kind of fold the pulleys in together. You kind of mesh them one inside the other. Get enough slack in the belt that you can pull it up over top of this other pulley and remove the belt. This will conclude our Chapter 6, Part 1 on the rebuild of the jf010e transmission. We want to thank you for participating in our virtual training solutions powered by ATRA. Until next time, let's keep fixing transmissions together.